Oh, that's me.
Hey, that's us.
That's us.
I think we're good to go.
I think we're good.
All right, looks like we got a full house today. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. I'm Michael Roy, the Technical Marketing Manager for VMware's vCloud Hybrid Service, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Chris Colati, who is a Senior Product Line Technical Marketing Manager. Hi. He earned his title, I promise. And we're going to talk to you about how you can build and consume the public and hybrid cloud in a day, even, no less.
So, actually, really quick, who was in the last session in here? I know a couple people were, so my apologies. I said it was on Wednesday. It's right now. I just tweeted that, but you're going to get to see the demo.
Yeah, so we're going to do some really cool stuff. We'll tell you a little bit about vCloud Hybrid Service, how it relates to folks over on this side of the pond, and we'll also go through a demo. We'll do some description on how you can actually architect your hybrid cloud with on-prem and off-prem resources, leveraging what VMware is going to be introducing. If you guys heard the keynote today up in the UK, coming pretty soon, actually. So,
there's a clicker somewhere.
Is there a clicker? There's a clicker.
Right there.
Hey, it clicks. All right. So, like I said, we'll talk about why, of course, not only about the overview of the service, but we'll talk about why this is important, why we think computing is moving in this direction, and why that matters for you and your organizations. We'll go through some use cases, so some of the specific details over what you would do with the service in addition to the whys. And of course, we have a really cool whiteboard thing here that Chris is going to, in real time, draw some really cool diagrams to help you understand what it looks like logistically when you're trying to consume and architect your service. And of course, the hybrid cloud, the real benefit is that you have this combination of on-prem and off-prem. So really migrating your applications is a key component to that. So we'll talk about vCloud Connector, and we'll look at some of the architectural nuances with the stretch deploy feature, whereby you can move your VM to the cloud, keep its IP address, automatically creates a tunnel. It's good stuff. So without further ado, and of course we'll have some time over at the end for some questions, and hopefully we can get those answered for you. So, like I said, Senior Product Line Technical Marketing Manager. He did just earn that, so congratulations on your recent promotion there, my friend.
Said in the last session it doesn't fit anywhere on a business card. So.
And if you abbreviated it, it sure looks interesting. Do follow us on Twitter. We like to tweet stuff all the time. Mike Roysoft and C. Colati on Twitter, and Chris has an amazing blog over at chriscolati.us. Tons of really valuable stuff that we've been putting out there pretty regularly.
And if you are tweeting sessions this week, definitely do it. And this year, unlike last year, the hashtags to use are the session IDs. Last year they changed it up on us, so they changed it back, so it's easier to remember. So definitely tweet in anything you want during any sessions this week.
Right on. So, talk a little bit about what the vCloud Hybrid Service is, and from an overview perspective. So what we're trying to address is this gap that we're seeing between business and IT. And when you guys check out, I believe is it tomorrow's keynote where Carl and Kit are going to do their thing?
Yeah.
You'll see how this divide really impacts the line of business, because you have these line of business types that require speed and agility. They need to innovate. They need to really build on top of what they're currently doing. And the IT team, they're really just kind of focused on keeping the lights on and making sure that everything works. And it's really hard to do that when you have these requests coming in really high. So you have this lack of trust from the business side, like, oh, come on, you're giving me another project. Really, have you thought this through? Whereas the business side is saying, hey, like, can't you just do this? I've given you all this capacity. I've given you these requirements. What's so hard about architecting, 100 more servers? Not really fully maybe understanding what that entails. So this is where we think that the vCloud Hybrid Service really is able to help bridge this gap, because we can provide the same solution to solve this problem, whereby you continue to maintain those on-prem resources, that data center that you're used to, but you can now leverage a huge amount of compatible infrastructure and compute resources in a public context, and do that in a way that's very seamless, that really integrates with what you've got on-prem in a way where you don't have to retool your applications and rethink how you do business and rethink how you manage your IT department. So, of course, what is it? It's infrastructure as a service that's owned and operated by VMware, built on top of the VMware stack. We are running vSphere underneath this, latest and greatest. and we do leverage some really amazing things. All of the great features that make vSphere amazing, we are leveraging in the service, and we're providing that to our customers, which they really just get these benefits of it without having to do anything additionally. So we have really great things like high availability that's built in, where when hosts go down, VMs are automatically moved over in vMotion. We're leveraging that technology, which has been industry tested and absolutely tried through the hardest of exercises. But really what really makes it different is that it's this public context that you can leverage and you can tack onto your existing business and infrastructure for both your existing applications, but as well it provides a way to start developing new applications, cloud-aware applications, things of tomorrow, where you'll see really interesting cloud platforms like Cloud Foundry come to play, where you can develop these apps that are aware of the ability to scale, they're aware of the ability to self-manage themselves. Of course, networking is a huge component, so we do provide a way to seamlessly interact and connect the two sites, so you have your off-prem, your on-prem that are managed under the same layers, the same topology effectively, using some of the really great networking technologies that we've been innovating with and will continue to innovate with. Common management, of course, using the vSphere client itself to actually look and view and manage the resources that are inside of the vCloud hybrid service. We will be releasing a plugin for the vSphere client pretty soon, and inside of there.
You have that in the booth, right? Because I told them to go check it out.
We do have it in the booth. Absolutely, come take a look. You know, we got a really cool demo going over there over in the Solution Exchange. I'll be there all day while I'm not here. And it's a really great way to use the same technology and the same tools. So you can use things, if you have like vCenter Operations Manager or Hyperic, you can actually use Hyperic to install in-agent guests and monitor them the same way that you would with your on-prem resources. And of course, what I think is a great thing, I do have a long history with the global support services. The ability just to call one phone number if you have any troubles, where we'll be able to actually understand your on-prem and your public resources and help you through the entire spectrum of anything that you might have a trouble with. So, and the really nice thing too is for all new customers, we actually provide a really awesome onboarding service through our customer success team, whereby we go through and we make sure that you understand how to connect. We do a whole lot of training, several one-on-one sessions, many hours of collaborative work where you give us some of your requirements, your needs, and we go back and we help you architect this in the way that is built to succeed inside of the vCloud hybrid service. So really what it boils down to, of course, is any application that you can bring over here that you can do this without having any changes. So what do we provide? Well, we provide access to the vCloud hybrid service through a couple of means. The web console, which we'll show off in a little bit, as well as the vCloud API. So if any of you guys are familiar with the vCloud Direct or REST API, you can continue to leverage that. If you have some custom applications that talk directly to VCD, you can use that in the public context, carve out some virtual data center space and talk to it through the API. I know some folks will do that to make self-service provisioning portals and things really easy for end users to be able to click a few things and have some policy attached to it. And the same thing with vCloud Automation Center, where if you can have a custom front end with that, you have all this great policy attached to it. When you start clicking things, it automatically has this great workflow that can leverage all these APIs. That can be done because we're leveraging the APIs. We do as well provide an application catalog. So you'll see inside of the vCloud hybrid service we have various operating systems that are already pre-built in. Right now there's like CentOS, there's a SUSE thing that's coming around, there's Windows Server, SQL, etc. And that's only going to continue to expand. We also recently launched the application marketplace. So that'll be a great place for third-party services, third-party applications that are going to innovate on top of the vCloud hybrid service the very same way that they innovated and integrated with the vSphere platform. You know, i.e. we're here today, so many of these amazing vendors are using vSphere as an add-on to their technology and vice versa. So we're going to continue to see that evolve as the months and years progress with VCHS. So in addition to the applications and the operating systems, you know, we do provide the infrastructure with which to run this. So we have essentially two discrete service types, and within those two discrete portions of the service. So compute and memory are, you know, one side, and then storage. So you can increment your compute resources as you need, and you can increment your storage resources as you need independently from each other, with a common network and security platform that leverages the vCloud network and security platform. So we have these really amazing edge gateways that can do 9 internal networks, one on the external side, to do some really interesting things that you just can't do in other clouds. And of course, VMware actually takes care of managing all of this for you. So you guys know what it's like when you stand up a vCenter, you've got all this overhead with the vCenter appliance, your database, and all the other add-on tools and all your monitoring stuff that you put onto it. Well, we actually take care of all of that. So not only are the vCenter resources abstracted from the pool of resources that you get to consume, but in addition, we actually manage all of the outside infrastructure as well, so the hardware and all of that. So even with regard to the network and security element, the edge gateways themselves, when you deploy them, if you have the case of a dedicated cloud, you can deploy multiple edge gateways. You don't actually consume any of your own resources for that. We take care of the overhead for you. So really, you just get all this gobs of compute and memory and storage resources without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure and the infrastructure and hardware itself. So what does that mean? What does that leave for you? Well, you get to bring your own tools, the tools that you're using on-prem, off-prem. So when you create this VPN, this tunnel, you have all this public resources that you can continue to manage just like they're local. Your own virtual machines, using vCloud connector, we can migrate your workloads across, and your own licenses. So if you have license portability, some of our cloud offerings are very friendly to being able to migrate your applications. So that's all you need to bring. So why do we use the public hybrid cloud? Chris, you want to tell us why?
Sure.
Take us back in time.
Yeah. So how many folks remember how disruptive virtualization was? Come on. I was an IT. I was a server admin.
We all did P2V. It wasn't fun.
So I remember the day when the VMware SE, who's actually still an SE today, he's global SE, Ravi, came into my shop and said, I'm going to take all that stuff in your data center and I'm going to put it in one box. And I went, nah, no, you're not. Right? And what we're seeing is, I'm a big fan of history. My grandfather was a big history buff. So one thing he always taught me was history repeats itself. No matter how often it comes back around, it always comes back around. And what we have to do is we have to remember the things from the past to learn what we need to do for the future. So the reason this slide's up here is I want everybody to sort of think a little bit, as we go into the diagramming, what we went through before and why we're having this conversation for public cloud. And it's really because we're starting to see that same disruption a little bit, right? So we're seeing new technologies and cloud come in, and now where we were all server admins, and I was that server admin that said, no, you can't take my server away, because that's what I do. And then I became a vSphere admin, and then I became a vSphere architect, and now I'm a cloud architect, right? So you just have to evolve over time as these things change. That's just what a paradigm shift is all about. So one of the reasons we talk about this is, why do you want to examine public cloud? Why do we have, what are the use cases, right? Everybody asks us every single day, what's the use case? Can you document another use case? Can you write another use case? Well, it's actually really easy. And the reason I say let's go back in time is, how many of us started in virtualization because we had data center physical capacity issues? Right? I know I was doing a job in New York City, downtown Manhattan, that the customer that I was working with couldn't get more power. The building would not give them more power. They were maxed out. There's a number of racks that they could have. So their virtualization project was to consolidate. But then what happens when you consolidate? You sprawl, right? And you go right back to the same situation that you were in before. So that same customer who brought everything down so they could bring in more applications, grew back out, and now they can't build another building, right? They can't add on to this other building, or it's very cost prohibitive to do so. So they're looking at capacity issues, right? They want to expand out, they need more capacity, they want to rent the capacity from somebody else, and that's where we or other cloud providers come in. We used to have this conversation all the time in my shop. You know, at the end of the year was coming around, budgeting time. It was all about CapEx. What do you need next year? What's going on? And all of a sudden, my manager would be like, well, what can we lease? What can we put on a monthly expense, right? What can we do that we don't have to put in the capital budget? Well, most cloud providers bill monthly, right, or quarterly. It's a different financial decision that your organizations can make, right? This is why we're talking use cases. Credit card, you know, obviously there's cloud providers that do pay as you go. This is a big thing, right? So I used to spend, personally, a lot of my time managing infrastructure, meaning standing up new servers, adding new vSphere, building new environments, troubleshooting, right? Going through all the processes to manage the infrastructure, where today we can pay for that, right? We can focus on the business. If we're visionaries and we work for organizations that are moving forward and trying to beat their competition, we should be building the new applications that we need to beat our competition, not fixing an ESX host that died. Leave that to the provider, right? Let them worry about it and pay and use the SLA to leverage that. If they don't meet the SLA, you get something back. Generally, that's how it works. So from application use cases, so we're actually going to show some of this live. Infrastructure on demand is probably the most common, right? Whether it's development, and when I say development, it could be real-time development that you guys have to do, that your developers just need resources, right? And today maybe they're swiping a credit card for Amazon, they're going someplace else. Public-facing applications, I talked about this in the last session, where web services are huge, mobile applications, things that need to scale out and scale down quickly, right? So that you can consume resources, you can shrink resources, you can manage this on the fly without having to deal with the physical infrastructure. And specifically, well, there's some disaster recovery as a service stuff that we didn't update the slide after the announcement in San Francisco, but we do have an offering that we're working on around DR as a service.
Makes it much less tricky.
Yes, makes it much less tricky. It was tricky when I was trying to do it in the lab with no help. But this is obviously a huge play, right? We're getting a lot of customers that are giving us I want to consume VCHS as a disaster recovery location, right? Because they want to use one of our data centers or multiple data centers. They want that virtual software-defined data center for DR, right? They're not going to run real-time applications in there. There's a whole bunch of things to think about that when you think about DR, though. You need infrastructure, you need things like that to make it work. But we are seeing this. We're seeing customers that are saying, well, I've got X amount of this application running here, and Dave used the toy company example at Christmas in the last session, which is, I need to burst out my web servers for a couple of months. And when I'm done with those, maybe after the first of the year, I need to burst out some number crunching servers. I don't know, right? Pick the poison. The use cases are abundant. The trick is, this is like any other data center that you just don't have to build, right? You can go spin up what you need and consume it, and we're going to show you how easy that is to do. And leveraging multiple data centers, obviously. We have, today we have Las Vegas, which is GA. We have Sterling, Virginia,
and Santa
Clara that are in beta. Right now?
No, they GA'd yesterday.
GA'd yesterday. And UK is coming online in beta later this year. I think they announced that this morning. So we are
Q4.
Moving across the pond, so to speak. So, okay, now we're going to take off our marketing hats, right? So, done with the slides. Yay. Cool. So we're going to attempt something that has never been done before. Actually, it was done in San Francisco. So what we're going to do next is we're going to walk you folks through what we built in an actual environment, and we're going to throw out some considerations and get some people thinking, and then we're going to actually show it to you. So I will tell you, none of this is recorded, so we are at the mercy of the internet connection, so bear with us if anything happens. The whiteboard will be live, so what we're going to do is we're going to explain a little bit about how the portal's designed, how you actually interface with it from a logical perspective. And then we're going to jump in and kind of bounce back and forth so you can see how we put the pieces together. Because it's really interesting when you see all the things you can do. Mike and I have sort of been re-swizzling our environment a little bit. We've got an actual web server that's running, and we're going to show you some real stuff, right? So is that cool? Is everybody done with slides for already in the week? Yeah? All right. We got a couple more afterwards, but I promise they're quick. And if we get to them, we get to them. If we don't, what are they? That's vCloud connector stuff. So we'll try to. So the first thing that I want to kind of draw is this large, what we call federated view, right? So when you actually get an account, and this is what we're going to show in VCHS, this is going to be your federated view. So when you log in, you basically get access to whatever you've purchased. Now, we won't go into the detail of what the offerings are. There's two offerings today. There's something called virtual private cloud, and there's something called dedicated cloud. If you want more detail on them, grab us afterwards. We can walk you through all the ins and outs. But at a high level, think about it this way. Virtual private cloud, shared infrastructure. Right? Shared with other tenants. Dedicated cloud, your own stuff, right? Your own hosts, your own virtual center, your own vCloud connector, multi-tenant node, your own
physically isolated.
Physically
as well
isolated.
As the management stack isn't completely yours. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we will say that we've purchased both, because we have in fact purchased both. Well, we didn't pay. Our boss is paying for it. So when we log in, and we have the option of actually seeing our VPC instance. And this, so you understand, this portal that we're going to show you and that we've built, this is what we've engineered. So VMware as a service provider has built and engineered this portal. This is our own build. And what we then have, and this is where things get a little incestuous, I guess is probably a term. That's a word.
We have our dedicated cloud. And the reason I'm drawing this a little bit differently is our VPC is a static instance. It has 20 gigs of RAM, it has 5 gigahertz of CPU burstable to 10, and 1 terabyte of storage. 2 terabytes of storage. So if we wanted to expand that, we could add resources onto it, and that's what's called a VPC core offering. But remember, because they're isolated instances, they actually have different vCloud directory interfaces, different vCloud directory APIs. Even though they're both living in Las Vegas, they are independent clouds. So this one actually gets 2 public IPs, and this one actually gets a total of 3 public IPs. And they're completely different vShield edges.
And of course, you can always add more IPs as you will. So one of the really cool things that we didn't touch on is that it's actually integrated with my VMware. So there's different role-based within the service whereby you can have some folks that are account administrators, other folks that are network administrators, user administrators, and then there's a subscription administrator. And this user can actually go in and procure more resources on the fly. We can actually stand up a full other dedicated cloud instance at 120 gigs of RAM, 30 gigahertz of compute with 6 terabytes of storage in about an hour. From the point to click to, hey, your work is ready to be consumed.
Right. So this is what we first purchased. And then what's interesting about dedicated cloud, and the reason I'm drawing these boxes within boxes here, is dedicated cloud as a customer allows you to create multiple virtual data centers. So the virtual private cloud is, think of it as one virtual data center. Right? That's a static offering, done. If you get a dedicated cloud, you actually get this pool of resources of 120 gigs of RAM, 20 gigahertz of CPU, and how much storage?
30 gigahertz of CPU
30 gigahertz
and
of CPU.
6 terabytes of storage.
6 terabytes of storage.
So you can increment the storage in those 6 terabyte increments, and you can increment the CPU in those increments as well. So that's the rack, if you will.
And what's interesting about this is you're actually able, as IT, to create individual virtual data centers to provision for different use within your organization. So we're actually giving you the control. We basically say, here's your bucket, and now you go create the virtual data centers you want. So what we're going to see, and what Mike and I have done, is we've created a tech marketing virtual data center. We've created a booth virtual data center, which you'll see, actually, if you go down the booth demos are running in this environment. We've actually got a services virtual data center for Massimo Referi and Greg Herzog. And we've got a VDI one, which is also being used for VMworld.
Some really interesting desktop as a service stuff we're testing out of there.
Right. Now, I've drawn on the left-hand side, I've drawn my resemblance of a vShield edge, or a vCNS edge. Darn it, I keep saying vShield. Now it's recorded. So in the virtual private cloud, you get one vCNS edge, right? You get your 2 IP addresses. So we'll start to draw the bottom of this in a second. In the right-hand side, in dedicated cloud, Mike mentioned you can spin up as many appliances for edge as you want. So we're going to actually show you some of the depth of that in the demo. We've spun up one for the VDI folks. We've spun up one for the booth. And this is where it gets hairy. We've actually spun up 3 in this tech marketing one. I'll only draw 2.
Each with a different public IP address.
Each with a different public IP address.
Different NAT rules, different firewall rules.
All
10 interfaces each.
Yes. So all software defined. And then what we have is, if we actually look at our physical data center, which is on order, we have ordered our equipment for our lab finally, we are going to basically build what you guys have. We're going to build our on-premise data center.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. I mean, it's taken just the speed of business itself. It's taken us several months to order this gear and have it stood up and have the IPs all thing. We had this environment stood up in from the initial point of, hey, we want it, to when we fully got it after doing the purchase and whatnot, it took us about 6 hours. Yeah. So for us to have...
That was what we showed last time.
Yeah, yeah, the old way of doing it just took forever, and the new way is remarkable.
So what we're going to stand up down here is we're not going to build Cloud Director, right? Understand, we want to, as tech marketing managers, as technical documenters, we want to build a vSphere only environment. Because obviously most customers have vSphere and they want to burst out to the cloud. So our mission is to actually mimic what most customers have. So we're going to build this on-premise environment. We're going to have a VPN appliance, and we're going to stand up, a whole bunch of infrastructure. We're going to build some domain controllers. We're going to build some app servers, and these are going to be on, various infrastructure networks. They're going to be on different subnets.
And just to be clear, we do not need vCloud on-prem.
Yes, this is vSphere only.
Entirely vSphere.
And because we've already got this built up here, it's kind of a little backwards, right? We got our VCHS space before we got our lab gear, so a testament to software-defined data center and how fast you can do stuff. When this is done, we actually, so everybody's clear, both the VPC and the dedicated cloud are actually running in Las Vegas. The stuff we're building on the bottom is actually going to be running in Wenatchee, which is in Washington?
Yep.
Yeah, I always get confused. So this will be down in
Washington State.
Washington State, and this is in Las Vegas. And actually, we're adding into this, I believe we're getting Sterling, Virginia VPC. So we won't see that in the demo, and we're getting a Santa Clara VPC, right? So we're getting a Virginia. And I'm drawing them all in the same interface because you're going to see that. I'm going to show you how you actually see all of these virtual data centers in one federated login, right? So that's what kind of makes this cool. And when this VPN is up, we've actually built a 5th virtual data center, which I'll draw in here, which is called our customer environment, and that also has a vShield edge. Ultimately, what we're going to do, and we don't have it set up for this, but we are going to build a VPN between this customer virtual data center and this on-premise data center. And once we do that, we're going to have a whole bunch of cool documentation that we're going to be able to write. Because we're going to have a nice environment that's actually put together, and we can start talking about more use cases, the bursting pieces. But what we want to show you is how this is all done and how flexible it is and how we were able to build all this stuff. What we also built that I'm going to show you is in this tech marketing environment, there is a web server and a database server running that we'll show you. And we actually built, I did this last week, I actually did a VPN connection between the VPC and the tech marketing virtual data center.
So the really cool thing is there's a backplane that goes at 10 gigabits per second. So we have a really awesome way to just, that's really, really fast.
So what's interesting is even though those are in the same data center, they're separate pods, right, from a design perspective, but in order to connect the two, to do basically a cross connect, we do a VPN tunnel between the two of them, but they're physically in the same location.
So you're saying this is a software-defined cross connect?
This is a software-defined cross connect, software-defined networking. And what I've done is there's actually, and when this is all said and done, we might actually take that cross connect and move it. We may move this cross connect down to this customer environment for the purposes of showing that we can go from on-premise to our virtual data center and dedicated and cross-connect it to our VPC. And so most people might be asking the question, why have both, a VPC and a dedicated cloud?
Why have both, Chris?
Well, I'll answer that, Mike. The answer is there are 2 price points. Right? So VPC is very limited in what it could do. It controls resources differently than a dedicated cloud. Dedicated cloud, and I'll actually show this in the demo, let me ask this question. How many folks are familiar with reservations and limits? How many folks use reservations and limits? That's when the hands go down, right?
And how many love it?
Yeah, how many have gotten in trouble with them, like I have in the past?
Same here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the reason I bring that up is how many folks know vCloud Director? So
a good show of hands.
A few people. So for the folks that don't, I'm gonna go a little bit deep here, so I apologize. But you know there's 3 allocation models for the people that know VCD, right? So we're using reservation pool in the dedicated cloud, and we're using allocation pool in the VPC. So when I say resources are managed differently, we're starting to write a bunch of white papers about that, but kind of stay tuned. We can talk about it after the fact. But they handle how they push different settings down to Virtual Center and how they manage the VMs, right? In dedicated cloud, you actually get to control it. That's why it's a little bit more, that's why it's more money, because we're giving you all of the control to carve it up, to figure out what you want to have reservations, what you don't want to overcommit, all that stuff. Yeah,
so basically you really have the ability to overcommit, so you're not limited to, well, I only have, 120 gigahertz or gigabytes of RAM worth of virtual machines. You can absolutely go well beyond that. It's just the contention levels start to creep up with the more virtual machines that you pile onto it.
Right. So I want to pause if there's any questions before I go actually into the interface and show you some of this stuff real time. Yes?
If you find out
Oh, hold on. There's a mic because there's a camera. Hold on. They're running. We don't have Chris in here to run with the mic this time.
It's coming.
Well, they're recording, so sorry. They just want to pick it up.
All right.
If you find out VPC is not right for you and then you then decide to choose a dedicated environment, can you easily move from VPC to that?
So we can move. I won't say the easily word. No, I'm kidding. We can use vCloud Connector to move it because they are independent clouds, right? So we have to use VCC to actually do the move, or our operations team can actually.
And because it's all running on the backplane, it would go across that 10 gigabit
Correct.
Link.
You're copying local, so it's quicker. It's not like copying from my house in New Hampshire to Las Vegas.
Where we can hardly get video conferences going properly?
We can't do Google Chat. So, any other questions so far on sort of what this looks like logically? All right, so let's jump over to the browser. So, when you actually get your account set up, you will log in with a single sign-on. If I can remember my password, that's always good.
Yeah, and the single sign-on's handy too, because like I was saying with the My VMware integration, if you could remember your password, when you're logged in and you click the My VMware button, it will do the single sign-on directly over to the My VMware portal, and the same thing with vCloud Director. So we actually do provide access to the full-on vCloud Director. So if there's something inside of here that you can't quite do, or you need to have some further level of granularity, like for example the reservation on a per virtual machine basis, you go into vCloud Director and it single signs you on over to that.
And we'll actually show you that, because the VPN stuff you actually have to configure in the back end. Right. So how many folks have seen this yet? Or is this the first time? Folks, is the first time they've seen it.
One guy, right on.
Cool. So this is basically what we're looking at is our account, so our single account on vCloud Hybrid Service. What I want to point out, and it might be a little difficult to see from the back, but you can see that this 5-37 is actually tagged to be a multi-tenant cloud. So in our diagram, that's our VPC. Right?
So what's that thing with the blue arrow there?
I don't know. That was rolled out the other day and I haven't figured it out yet.
So allow me to tell you what that is. You lob it up and... So that's actually our data protection services. What that actually tells you is that data protection on that particular virtual data center is enabled. So we have a really interesting service whereby we keep a rolling backup for 30 days. So it takes there's a cadence where it takes a backup every day, and you have basically 30 days that you can go back and pick any point in time and restore that. So currently it's something that we need to engage with GSS to do. You just make a call and say, hey, I want to restore, but we're going to be rolling out self-service for that real soon. Right. So in case you're wondering what that was. Yeah. Chris.
So this is VPC. What you'll notice on these is they all say they're on the same number, right? They all say 9-64.
Cloud 9, that's us.
Yeah, so we're on Cloud 9. And anybody get the joke, Cloud 9, right? So we've basically done exactly what we drew, right? We carved this this dedicated cloud up into multiple virtual data centers. So if you go down the booth and they spin up a virtual machine, it's actually going to spin up here. So we can look into that. But what I want to do is I want to drill into some of this. And you can see we've got a number of public IPs available, because this one came, the 5-37, we got 2. The dedicated cloud, we got 3, and we ran out, so we asked for more. Because we need to do more stuff. So we're able to track those IPs. Overall, from an IT perspective, we could see how much CPU has been purchased, how much CPU has been allocated. So it's a single pane of glass. So Mike, if you want to drill into the technical marketing one. So I want to go down into this one, because this is the one virtual data center that we've actually done some interesting things with. So you can see here on this particular virtual data center, we've allocated 40 gigs of memory and 2 terabytes of storage. What's really cool about this service is if you actually click on one of these, we can change that on the fly. So if you've provisioned or given a business unit 10 gigahertz of CPU and they've exceeded it, you can go in and give them more, right? In the dedicated cloud model. So I'm focusing on dedicated cloud because it's got more controls and more enterprise type features that a lot of customers are looking for. And you can do it with both CPU and memory and storage. So all 3 of them you can change on the fly. Remember, as you change it, it's coming out of your 120 gig bucket of memory, right? You're working within the same pool of memory. So if we look at the virtual machines that are running, and we'll dig into these in a second, we've got a couple of things running. So because there's 3 people sharing this VDC, there's Mike, myself, and our colleague Jay. We come up with our own. I've tried to do a naming convention, which nobody wants to follow. But anyway, I have this jump box. I've got a SQL server, this web server. We'll talk about these 2 specifically in a moment. This CentOS box we'll talk about, because that's the one that's showing the VPN between the VPC and the dedicated cloud. And Mike's got something running, and Jay's got a couple things. If we look at the gateway,
I like having a desktop in the cloud. It's really handy.
Yeah. So if we look at the gateways, I want to drill into this, because remember I said there was multiple gateways. In virtual private cloud, you get 1 gateway to the internet, right? 9 interfaces available. Dedicated cloud, you can have up to, is there a limit on it? There's no limit, right? It's just as many.
The number of gateways. No,
no limit on the gateways.
Only whatever the vCloud Director limits are.
So what we've done is, for the 3 of us, we kind of sat down, and this is interesting because we had a blank slate. Actually, we didn't have a blank slate. It had a whole bunch of stuff configured. I made a bunch of phone calls and deleted everything. And then we started clean. And we had to make design decisions, right?
Our environment was really popular.
How we wanted to break this up. So basically we said, well, let's do this. So we could showcase this in a demo or something. Let's give each of us a separate gateway. Give each of us at least 1 public IP address. That way, I can do whatever firewall rules that I want for my stuff. Mike can do his separately, right? We're not actually working on the same firewall. We're actually using different firewalls. And on mine, I've actually got 3 was there 3 public IPs? No, there should only be 2. Oh, there might be, I borrowed one because of the VPN. But, so if we look at the NAT rules, as we drill further, we can create source NATs and destination NATs. So we'll talk about this one. So we'll we'll write that IP address down for a moment, and we'll remember it. And you can do all of this in this interface. The question came up in the last one, do I have to do things inside the VCD interface? No, we've actually exposed a lot of the networking stuff here. If we look at the networks specifically, I want to talk about this. So I couldn't go deeper on this drawing, right, because it would just keep getting like smaller and smaller. But as we drill down, what I've actually created on that vShield edge is a VCNS edge. I've created a default routed network, I've created what I've called my corporate routed network, and I've created a public routed network. The reason being is I want to be able to show that on this network is my web server, it's public. On this one is the database server, and I'm going to show the firewall rules between the two. And this one is the one I just used for the VPN between the two clouds. So if we actually look at the public IPs, there is just the one public IP, right? But more importantly, if you go to the rules, Mike, because that's where it actually shows the rules. So what we can see is it's very, very basic. One thing I want to point out, is there any security folks in the room? I asked this question in the last one. There's usually one security. No
Everybody should be a security folk.
No security person. Well, these rules don't exist, right? When you deploy this firewall, it's the way a firewall should be. It's blank. It's allow nothing, deny everything, right? So you have to write the rules that you want. So what I've done is I've actually made sure that I created an SSH connection to that public IP address, right? And I've mapped it to, and I've done a web rule and a SSL rule. But more importantly, what I wanted to show is, remember I've got those two networks. I've got my public and my private. I've actually taken and created a rule on my public network so that I can talk to the database server. But I haven't done it by subnet, right? I've done it by individual IP address. So the only thing that's allowed to communicate between those two is the web server, the SQL server, and the SQL server back. And I've actually, what I did specifically is I created an SSH rule from the web server to the SQL server. So I don't have SSH exposed on the SQL server directly. I can SSH to the web server, which in turn can SSH to the SQL server, just so I can manage this stuff.
You fancy.
Yeah. And then this one is the rule for allowing anything, any traffic between my VPN between the two clouds, right? From my dedicated cloud to my virtual private cloud. So I can actually pass traffic, whatever the port is, because it's secure. I know it's my VPC and my dedicated cloud, so in that case I didn't want to restrict anything. And of course, I did elect to allow all outbound. I don't have to do that. So the question came up in the last session, which is when you get these data centers, you get a firewall, you get internet access, right? And it's really good internet access, by the way. You could set up this rule that says all of those networks I create are allowed to go from internal to external, but in some cases you may actually, if you've interconnected these back to an on-premise data center via MPLS or VPN or whatever technology, you may elect to have and force all of your browsing traffic go across that link through your corporate center so you can control it with your existing firewalls, proxies, whatever you have. So if that rule didn't exist, I could write a different rule that said force all HTTP traffic out through the VPN, right? So just a point of note, for ease of updates and things, I wanted to have everything go out. So if you actually jump out to the VCD interface, because I want to show this graphically for the web server.
Isn't it on your Windows side?
No, you can jump out here. I think it'll be fine. We won't do the console yet, because I can SSH to, actually I think I can SSH to all of them. Ignore the error, it's Chrome. So this is the single sign-on piece. So what we're actually doing is we're jumping from the VCHS portal over to the out-of-box VCD portal.
It comes right here to the gateway section where
Correct.
we just were.
And what I want to show specifically is I actually want to show this so this application that I have running is WordPress. And what you can see graphically is that the web server, the database server is connected to the corporate network and the web server is connected to the public network. So this is what's interesting. So I actually like the vApp construct in VCD. It makes sense to me. So I've created one vApp, which is WordPress, but in that vApp I have two virtual machines that happen to be independently connected to two different networks. That's completely doable.
So if I wanted to be like super hybrid, couldn't I take that database and have it on-prem?
You could have it on-prem, or since this is running MySQL, what I could do is I could create a MySQL server on-prem with the VPN connection and maybe do replication. For
yeah, that's a really great use case.
I know, I think we're writing that one. That one will be coming out in a couple of months.
I'm writing that document right now.
And if we look at we can expose all the networking on the back end that's available to this vApp. What I want to show too is you can see here the same three gateways. So for me, I'm familiar with the VCD interface, so I tend to hack around in here because that's where I go. But if I go into the properties of this, or actually the services, this is where you can see the VPN tunnel that's been built between the two clouds. So this isn't something yet that's exposed in the VCHS UI, so if you want to do this a little bit more advanced, you got to dig in.
I mean, and ultimately our goal is to make everything that's inside of vCloud Director available from the public portal.
Right, we want to make it easy.
And then henceforth backwards into the vSphere client itself.
And what you can see is we've got our local endpoint, which is the 230 address. We've got the endpoint on the other side. So you notice the VPC public IP address is a completely different range, right, than the dedicated cloud. And then we can define the networks that are allowed to talk, right? What I want to point out is when I did this setup, and this is actually very easy because when you're doing a cloud-to-cloud VPN between two VPC and a VDC, it's all like wizard-driven. It's all done through VCD's API. So you pull up one screen and you give it the credentials to the other cloud. It talks to that one through the APIs. It creates the rules and everything.
Yeah, and if it's not obvious, the peer address is a public IP address. It may start with 192, but it's 192.240, not 168.
And what it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't set up the firewall rule to allow the traffic that I showed you. That's something I have to create. So it says, OK, I'll establish the VPN between the two. Tunnel is up. You have to go define which types of traffic you want to go between. And you can define multiple peer NATed addresses, too, if you wanted to. So if you had 9 segments in the cloud and you had 2 on-premise, you can set all that up. And
so what if in my vSphere on-prem I don't have vCloud Network and Security? Am I still able to leverage this VPN?
Yes. So
I've got a Juniper. Is that going to work?
Yep. We configure it the same exact way. So what we'll notice, and we'll just run through, we won't configure it, but you'll see you've got 3 options when you set this up. You can configure a network in this organization, which would be 2 segments between each other, which could be useful if you wanted to secure traffic between your public and private. I could actually do a VPN between those and then not have to write a rule. Well, I'd still want to write a rule, but you can do a network to another organization, which is what I've done here, which is technically 2 different clouds. But this last one, the remote network, is your straight IPsec VPN settings, right? So if it's a Juniper, a Cisco, a Checkpoint, we don't care what it is on the other end. You can still do standard IPsec protocol. So just to show that there is actually something really running in here, let's go back real quick to this view, and let's just take a look at that public IP address. So if we do a quick NS lookup on a domain that I have, because Mike and I have about 1,000 domains between the two of us. Interesting. Oh, that's why I can barely see it.
Command plus.
So what we can see is this is a domain that I happen to register, and we can see that that IP address actually matches, right? So I'm just trying to prove to you that this is real. There's not like...
He's not crazy.
Not cuckoo. And if we actually go hit that domain, which is not my blog site. We don't want that.
Although your blog site is running on VCHS.
Yeah. So...
And it gets a lot of traffic.
This is the WordPress server that we actually looked at, right? So I just stood this page up. But if we wanted to look into the back end of it, we're actually hitting the web server and the database server real time, right? So this is just one example of, and the reason I like this WordPress application is because I can do a 2-tiered environment. I can do a web server and a database server.
It's a really great example.
Yeah, we could do appliances, but that doesn't really show the multiple networks. I'm a big network person, so
we can do SharePoint, but SharePoint's boring.
Yeah, I know enough about networking to make networking people really scared of me, but they don't want me touching anything, but I can explain it. But I think that's a good way to see it, because you can now start to see how we drill into that picture we drew, and you get this feeling of how this looks like a regular data center in all aspects. So I want to pause there. Is there questions so far about what you're seeing here?
Have we confused you thoroughly yet?
Is this cool?
I think our message is resonating.
Yeah. We haven't done the live demo before, and we thought it would be a good idea here to show it since we did announce the UK piece. So for people who want to actually get into the beta, this is what you'll see. And actually in our dashboard, when we get access to Sterling, Virginia, those will show up as another cloud number. Right?
The actual sites will show up right here. There's a drop down, and you can just pick the site. So each site essentially has its own cloud instance. So data centers that are in one location will not show up in a different location.
Right.
We do have a higher level view when you first log in where you see all of the locations and all of the virtual data centers, and you can drill into it. So it's much less confusing than Amazon.
Right. So let's go back to the last couple of slides. We got 15 minutes left. Can you toggle the box back?
All right.
Cool. And so let's talk really quickly about, the question came about how you migrate between two clouds or from on-premise. So I'll let Mike talk a little bit about the features that VCC has.
Sure. So I'm also the former product marketing manager for VCC, so I was able to bring it to life and to more or less where it is right now. So I helped add some of these really cool features. And one thing that we found was really requested a lot was, how do I transfer really large workloads? I've got 10 terabytes of database that I need to get over, and my uplink is going to take a week, and I can't afford to thoroughly saturate my upload traffic, and I certainly can't afford to wait a month if I were to throttle it down to something more reasonable. So we developed the offline data transfer module. So essentially what this is it's a service that through vCloud connector, you request this through our global support services, and we ship you a NAS device. You plug that into your network. There's a quick thing you do inside of vCloud connector to make it available, and you pick your workloads, you put them onto the NAS device, it's entirely encrypted, you ship it back to our data center, and we will import it and then destroy the data on the device using NSA-approved wiping technology. Some of the other things that we did with the most recent version, of course, is we added some performance optimization. So we use a protocol that is a little bit faster than TCP. Essentially, it's a UDP-based protocol, so the overhead from the transmission is different, and we have other ways to make sure that the error checking still happens because data is important. Data integrity is important. And in 2.0, what we released is the data center extension feature. So this was previously locked, and technically still is locked behind a license key. So we were providing this as a value add for vCloud Suite subscribers, whereby you would put in your vCloud Suite key inside of vCloud connector, and it would enable this data center extension feature. So what this allows you to do is migrate a workload to the cloud and do it by keeping the same IP address, the same MAC address, and not running guest customization. So the VM doesn't lose its identity. It maintains it knows who it is, and it doesn't change. And we create a layer 2 SSL VPN tunnel in addition that really allows it to maintain seamless connectivity back home. So it routes back through the VPN tunnel and out through the corporate firewall, and you can set up other rules to make it route in different ways for
we got a few slides we'll show on that too, because that was too much to draw.
It's a lot. It can be confusing because you have two layers that you have to go through for the edges. And as well, we have a catalog sync, which is a really neat feature. I call it our unsung hero, because really what it allows you to do is maintain a template library and synchronize that across all of your clouds. So you effectively turn it on, you say, this is my source cloud, these are my destination clouds, because in Cloud Connector you add all of your clouds so they all show up. You say, hey, these are the ones that I'm going to subscribe, and these are the ones that are going to consume, and every 6 hours or so, we do a synchronization where those templates are pushed out. So if you delete it from the one, you have the ability to choose to be destructive or not. We give you the choice. But ultimately, it really makes it easy for folks to stay on the same page and maintain template synchronization. So you update a template in one site, you walk away, and overnight or within a couple of hours, it'll automatically get pushed out. And so we talked a bit, so this is basically the interface for the vSphere client. It's inside of the older C# client. You're going to see that moving to the web client really soon, but it's just a way to show. So we've got our local vSphere data center here. We've got, this was the vCloud service evaluation, which is just about ready for EOL.
We're probably going to update that screenshot.
Yeah, well, it's still alive.
And this is demoed in the booth as well. There's actually a data center extension demo.
Yeah, we do have a data center extension demo and lots of videos that show just the basic migration piece as well. So this in the case of templates, but you could also take a look at vApps and virtual machines here too. So this is actually the vSphere web client. We definitely need to update this slide too. So the icon's a little different. It looks like the icon on his shirt there.
Oh, they changed it.
Yeah, this was pretty old. But the concept is the same, essentially that all of the things that you're looking at inside of the VCHS portal are showing up on-prem inside of your vSphere client, the same client that everybody uses every day. So it's boring, but it's really awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about stretch deploy and when you'd want to use that. So it's kind of a neat nuanced feature, but Chris, maybe you can tell us about when it's appropriate.
Yeah, so I touched on this in the last session, so this is where I'm going to go a little bit deeper into it. So the concept, as Mike said, around stretch deploy is this ability to take a virtual machine, it's running a vSphere or vCloud Director on-premise, and migrate it to VCHS, but keep its network settings, keep its IP address, keep its MAC address, and keep its identity. Now, why would we do that? I have this conversation all the time, and there's a few reasons that myself and a couple of the other folks have come up with But outside of this box, it kind of gets to the conversation if we could probably change the IP address, right? But these are the ones that we've sort of landed on, and with Mike and myself and a couple other folks. But clearly, this is a big one. If you've got an application running that is in your premise, and you've got ACLs out there and firewall rules, and you do want to move it, first of all, I'm going to ask you, is that the first thing we want to move to VCHS, right? It's not what I would consider low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Right? But eventually, as you go through this progression, maybe you do have this application you want to move. Well, that's a clear use case for data center extension. We'll talk about how it works. Things that how many folks have run into a machine? This is how I used to do it in my data center. You'd go through the inventory and you'd see this old machine laying around, and my boss would say, go turn it off for about a week until somebody calls. That's how you find out if it's still running, right? Or if there's another machine talking to it, that somebody hard-coded an IP address, right? And you go run back, you turn it back on. Now you know who owns it. Well, sometimes we run into that, right? We're not using DNS, we're using hard-coded IPs, old applications that weren't developed, the way we're developing them today with proper procedures. Or this one, I think, how many people still run into licensing and MAC address issues? It's still out, right? I mean, we run into it rarely, but it's still a problem. So would everybody sort of agree that, yeah, these are definitely the cases where you would absolutely not want to touch it, change the IP address, change any MAC addresses, right? So now, how do we do this, and what does it look like? So what is data center extension? And we keep calling it DCE, data center extension, stretch deploy, all the same thing. It's because it's stretch deploy on the UI, it's data center extension in the papers and in the documentation. So what it is it's basically a unique feature and functionality where we extend your network via layer 2 VPN into VCHS. And we do all of the copies, we do all of the network creations, all of that happens with basically the click of a mouse.
So one of the nice things is, like I said, this feature as well as content sync was behind the license key for vCloud Suite. We actually provide the license key to unlock these features for every vCloud hybrid service customer. So if you want to use it, it's totally there for you. It's available without having to upgrade your on-prem environment to vCloud.
Yeah, so what does it look like, right? So there's, with everything, so one of the reasons I love doing these presentations is because I do have marketing in my title now, but it still says technical marketing, so I like to actually give maybe some of the ins and outs of what you want to consider. He's a bigger geek than
his title lets on.
Yeah, so this is why we couldn't draw it. So this is one example. So what I want to point out is we've got two different examples. This one is assuming that your on-premise is a vCloud Director cloud, right? The next one will be a vSphere environment. The reason being is the requirements are different. So if you have vCloud Director on-premise or you have vSphere on-premise, what we can do is a little bit different. In this case, you have to have what's called a vApp network, right? So for folks that are not VCD-centric, we're going to put all this into one technical brief, actually, and put all the requirements together so people can read it.
And we're also going to make these slides available for everybody after the fact, too.
Essentially what happens is we've got these edge gateways. So we've got our original edge gateway that we saw on the diagram. This is our public IP address. And we've got another edge gateway which isolates this vApp network. What we're able to do is we're able to say, let me stretch VM1, and what's going to happen is on the other side we create another vApp network that looks exactly the same, and we're going to actually copy that virtual machine over with all of its information in place. And it's going to function through a VPN tunnel back between the two sites. Okay? And in this scenario you're seeing two vApps, which actually makes sense. A vApp on side A, you get a vApp on side B. Now, how many folks just have vSphere and not VCD? Most of the hands
pretty
probably
much
should
everybody.
go up, right? Looks a little different in vSphere. So in vSphere, what we actually have to do is we deploy, well, let me change the question. How many folks are running VCNS today? vCloud Networking and Security.
Instead of vSphere.
Without vCloud Director.
Exactly.
Very few. So this is a requirement because we're doing all this through the VCNS APIs. But let me point out, you have to deploy a vShield edge, a VCNS edge gateway, but you don't have to configure it. It's basically acting as a VPN endpoint for this functionality to work. So we basically create a two-ported edge. We bridge your network that you want to stretch and the internet, any network interface that has internet access, right? And we do the same exact process. We tell it to go kick off this process. On the other side, we will still get a vApp network with another edge, and it will look the same. The difference is we just don't have a vApp on the vSphere side, right? Because nobody really uses the vSphere vApps. But the vApp construct in VCD is completely different than the vApp construct in vSphere.
Yes, in vSphere it's still a VM, but in VCD it ends up being a single VM'd vApp.
For the next slide, I want everybody to think about this. So when this VM gets moved, we said it maintains all of its existing networking information. which means when it lived over here, for the purposes of this example, it had a gateway of 110.10, which is on my core routing switch, which is in most cases where it's going to live, right? Well, we've now moved it, and it now has the same default gateway. So how do you think it gets back to everything it needs to talk to? It's going to have to come back through the VPN, right? Because we don't want to change that. We don't want to change that infrastructure because in that sense of firewall rules, ACLs, right, we want it to go back to the core. That's okay in most cases. However, me being me, I like to point out some considerations because I'm that kind of guy. I'm a nice guy. So some of the things you want to think about, and you may already be thinking about this, those folks who like drawing network diagrams like I do, is all of that traffic has to go through the VPN, right? So it keeps that IP address, which might not be a problem unless maybe you're thinking Active Directory, right? Because where does the Active Directory site network definition live for that IP range? Which domain controllers are handling it? The ones on premise. So if it's a Windows box, all of your AD authentication, DNS lookups, right? You can't tell Active Directory that you've created a stretched site. It doesn't have that concept. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just something to think about. So if you're troubleshooting and you do this and you're like, why is this taking so long to authenticate, right? Just things you got to think about. And I'm a big XAD guy, so I think about those things. What's cool is you can actually stretch one VM, and once you've created that VApp network, you can go and stretch multiple more with a shorter process, right? Because we've already done the network creation.
Yeah, you just do more migrations. You don't have to do more stretch deploys.
Yeah, so what one customer asked me to test is, I don't actually have a VM that I want to stretch. And I'm going to preface this with, this is not yet supported, but I tried it, and it kind of works. But it's the concept of I want to create the network and then I want to deploy new virtual machines out there. I didn't know why you wanted to do it. He just wanted me to test it because I said, it's not really a use case that I'm going to promote. But what I did is I used an empty virtual machine. Right? I didn't actually stretch a real running VM. I just created a shell, put Windows, VMware tools on it, initiated the stretch, and then once the network was created, deployed another VM from template into that network and then destroyed the original. And it worked. But that's not the use case that we want to look at for this, right? Because why would I want to knowingly deploy a new virtual machine into a network that I've stretched? It's not really meant for that. It's meant for those use cases we saw where you just you want to migrate it, but you can't make a change to it. And the other thing, too, is we don't customize the guest, right? So obviously we don't run sysprep. None of that stuff happens. It's an exact duplicate of what it was before. What's cool is it's an exact duplicate with MAC address, which is unique. One thing to think about for those who know VCD, there is a VApp container limitation of 128 VMs. So if you've got a /24, you can't do all the machines, right? You can do 128 of them. And the other thing to consider as an operator of this is VApp containers have controls. You can power off a VApp, you can power on a VApp. Well, if you have 128 VMs in a VApp and somebody hits the red button, they all power off, right? So this is something that Mike and I actually are working with engineering to try to do some different things with this, move things around, and we're actually making some headway to try to get it a little bit easier to understand and use, but it does work today. It does have its use cases. The thing I would say is if you're looking at vCloud Connector, don't necessarily look at it just for the DCE piece. People love it. They think it's a cool option, but like Mike said, the catalog sync is also pretty valuable too. But this does work, and we do have use cases for it. So you just got to know the considerations.
So we keep hearing clapping from everywhere else?
I saw the sign. We have like 2 minutes left.
There we go.
So with that, we can take some quick Q&A if there is any, or we can do them outside. But we do want to remind everybody, please fill out your surveys. It is how we make these sessions better for follow-on VMworlds and how we get asked to come back. So we have about 2 minutes if people have questions. So ran right up to the end. Yes? Microphone, hold on.
Coming on over with the mic.
Run.
Hurry.
Thank you.
You've detailed all the building blocks for inside the vCloud Director, inside the hybrid cloud.
Yes.
And you did mention bandwidth. You say it's all nice and fast and super, but what's the charging model for that? Is there any, how does that work?
Yeah, if we actually, if you go to vcloud.vmware.com, both offerings are detailed with the bandwidth as well. Yeah. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
I know.
The 14-hour flight is apparently turned my brain to mush. But vcloud.vmware.com, go to the top, I think it's options or services.
We do as well have a booth at the Solution Exchange that is exclusively business focused, where we talk about the pricing and all the different service offerings and how it's
But there is
how it
different
breaks down.
bandwidth. Yeah.
So you can come on over and ask us there too.
Good question, though. Other questions? comments, concerns?
Silence forever hold your peace. Well,
Hopefully the demo and whiteboard was a little better than all slides, so.
I thought it was fun. I had a good time doing it. Thanks so much, everybody,
Thank you,
for attending.
everybody.
Really appreciate it.